In a dismal future, a blazing neon light from the past cuts a pathway toward tomorrow. Bounding into Comics and Brett R. Smith present Escape from the Future.
Welcome to Escape from the Future. I'm your host and comic veteran, Brett R. Smith, and joining me today is my good friend and Bounding into Comics contributor, Remso Martinez. This is a new show we're going to be doing on a weekly basis, so make sure and subscribe to Bounding into Comics for more videos like this one and others. Remso, good to see you.
Brett, we're here in the Bounding into Comics YouTube channel. We're talking movies.
Yes.
We've got an awesome setup. You're back. We're back in action. This is pretty cool stuff, man.
No, it is. This is fun. So it's fun to be a part of Bounding, and I'm looking forward to Escape from the Future. And we're going to be doing movie reviews, all kinds of stuff, interviews, all kinds of fun stuff, pop culture, entertainment related. In this episode, we're going to discuss Ridley Scott's new film, Napoleon, starring Joaquin Phoenix and Vanessa Kirby, both of which Remso and I recently saw. Remso, what was your takeaway?
Man,
overall, did you like it? Let's just start off with that first.
I don't think it's the worst movie I've seen. I do, however, think that I'm really mixed on it, depending on the day. Since I saw it in theaters on Thanksgiving, I think my level of defense of it has kind of gone down. Okay. But here's the things. Here are the things to consider. One, first Ridley Scott movie in a pretty long time. So that's a pretty big thing. Two, you got two great actors. You got Joaquin Phoenix and you got Vanessa Kirby. And three, it's not a film that you're going to see a lot of other studios kind of regurgitate. It's not based off a giant franchise. It's not a prequel reboot. It's not based on a whole bunch of IP. We're dealing with a historical figure. So with that, you're going to have the people who are like, oh, is it super historically accurate? And then you're going to have the people who are like, but is it a good movie? And it kind of sits in between all of that. I think what you're going to have is you're going to have a lot of people that just walk out confused as to whether or not they like it. Yeah. But I can firmly say that within a couple of years, I see this movie being in like Gladiator territory. This is going to be a cult classic, whether people want to just make fun of it for its own sake or not. But there are just a lot of good moments where you're just like, it's those things that kind of make me like this movie. And you kind of let go of the things you nitpick about. So all in all, it was an experience for sure. I'm glad I went to see it. I don't think it's for everybody, but the fact that we're talking about it says something, because
that's true.
I haven't been excited about movies past Oppenheimer, even Barbie, which I went to go see with my wife. I was like, objectively, like, this is entertaining. It's kind of fresh. Now it is based off IP. It is going to be built into a franchise, but it's like people largely liked it.
They did.
And same went for Oppenheimer. Other than that, what do we have? We have Mario and Guardians of the Galaxy. It kind of goes into that corporate IP franchise realm, but I mean, this felt like a true film. Whether you love it or hate it, this was a truly authentic standalone film, which I just found really refreshing.
I agree. I'm a huge Ridley Scott fan. He's probably in my top 5 favorite directors, so I'm a little biased in that sense. I would say this is probably. I would say it's one of his more stronger films. There's definitely some stuff out there like The Last Duel that I just flat out did not enjoy. I thought that was a very weak.
Was that with Affleck and Adam Driver?
Yeah. And I just
that was a movie you had to like prepare yourself for, because I didn't anticipate them doing what they did in that, which was where they split the acts,
right,
to show perspective
into 3.
Yeah, it was Damon, Affleck, and then Driver,
right.
But I mean, this reminded me more of the stuff he did like 20 years ago. Like I equated it to Gladiator primarily because of Joaquin Phoenix. But this reminds me of Gladiator. This reminds me of one of my personal favorites, which people think was one of his worst films. I really liked Body of Lies of Leonardo DiCaprio.
That's a strong film. That's another one that I don't think did very well, but has aged really well.
It did better upon, direct to DVD and Blu-ray and everything than it did in theaters. In theaters, it was virtually like unknown. And it was still during that, like, Iraq, Afghanistan era. But like, he's a very good linear storyteller. I think a lot of like the big high profile guys, your Nolans, your Villanovas and everything, they either want everything to be super complicated or they want everything to be super long. Whereas Scott is like, you could find something in the middle that's still really accessible to people.
Yeah.
And my big gauge is my wife. If my wife is able to sit through a roughly 3-hour film about Napoleon of all people and still be kind of sucked in and paying attention and following along with it, not just looking at me like, oh man, this is over. Like that's when I'm like, oh damn, like they did something pretty good.
Yeah, no, same with my girlfriend, Lisa Di Pasquale. She really liked this film, and I was kind of blown away by that, just because I don't know if it's necessarily her speed, and and like me, she's not a Ridley Scott devotee, so it was probably a good barometer from that standpoint for me, that a normie can walk in and watch this and be captivated by it and immersed inside of it. So something else I wanted to mention is that, the critics over the years have largely despised Ridley Scott. He's gotten many snubs in the Oscars, never won Best Director. Obviously, Gladiator won Best Picture, Russell Crowe, Best Actor. He lost out that year. I forget to who, doesn't matter. But they always say the same thing. He's amazing. It's always, this argument of style over substance, which is amusing to me, given that filmmaking is a visual medium first. And, I think when it comes to Ridley, I just never listen to the critics. And there's been a lot of criticism over this movie, which I think is unfortunate. I think people were expecting something and they got thrown kind of a curveball. So, with this video, I just want to focus on the strengths and what we enjoyed about it, because I think that the good outweighs the film's shortcomings.
Yeah, I mean, for everything that I complain about, it has less. One, I'm not complaining about the acting. I think a lot of films have just really kind of, like beaten their actors to death with like constant reshoots and having them play just like really flat characters. I've been a fan of Vanessa Kirby since her first appearance in the Mission Impossible films.
Yeah.
I even thought she was funny in Hobbs and Shaw, which is, just an action popcorn flick where people are like, that's stupid. And I'm like, I will pay money to watch The Rock and Jason Statham all the time.
Sure.
So I'm a big Vanessa Kirby apologist. Joaquin Phoenix, though, this is one of the roles where it's like people were expecting one of two things from him. They were either expecting him to be really weird, or they were expecting him to just be like super creepy. And it's one of those things where it's like, okay, either he's Maximus or he's the Joker, or he's who he was in the movie The Mastermind, about like the foundation of Scientology and stuff like that. This was probably him in what I would consider like in his most vanilla role. And what's good for that is he was playing somebody who actually existed. Ridley Scott said on multiple occasions in promotion of the film that he had to rewrite the script just to accommodate Joaquin Phoenix.
Yeah.
And I felt like that was actually one of those things where it's like, you know what? Do that for your leading man. Like, move into his strengths. Let him have some creative control in it. And while I think there were some parts where I'm just like, I don't know what's going on with this dude, I stopped seeing Joaquin Phoenix, the actor. I started seeing him as Napoleon, the character. And you don't get to really say that about many people. Cillian Murphy got it playing Oppenheimer.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of and I'm not gonna say like, I'm not gonna bring in like fictional characters. Like, obviously, Margot Robbie as Barbie, like that's the most like one-to-one thing you could get. But like when I see like the Guardians films or something, I see Chris Pratt.
I do
Like,
too.
that's just it. Like, there are many situations where it's like the actors kind of pull you out. I thought I was going to get that with Vanessa Kirby. I think she was great as Josephine. The others throughout the film, like the guy who plays the Duke of Wales at the end, I was like, like this doesn't remind me of like a BBC drama. Like, this isn't Masterpiece Classics or Bridgerton. Like, this is actually like, these are good. Like, I buy that these people are into it, and that's what Ridley Scott allows his actors to do. It's like whether you're playing somebody who's real or not, it's like just be the character, be the character, and he will create the scene around that.
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on. It's interesting. A lot of people complained about the historical accuracy, and I think that it's good to note that this is Ridley's vision. It's his film. So if you're looking for pure and total historical accuracy, maybe you should go and watch a documentary on Napoleon. Joaquin was quoted as saying, if you really want to understand Napoleon, then you should probably do your own studying and reading, because if you see this film, it's the experience told through Ridley's eyes. It's a complex world, and what we were after was something that would capture the feeling, and I think that he did. I think that Joaquin was able to sort of he's a real chameleon in this, and I think that it showed some range. I did find him a bit a bit too stoic on occasion and a little bit too impenetrable. But at the same time, that sort of crumbles when he's around Josephine, Vanessa Kirby's character, and others like dignitaries and such. You know, there's that great scene where he kind of loses it with the Brits, and he says, "You think you're so great just because you have boats." You know,
that's my like favorite scene to like love and hate at the same time, because he just comes off as just such an insecure person. And I think the only thing, and I agree with you,
kind of
yeah,
bratty.
yeah, like I agree with you. I think it's like if you want historical accuracy, like go watch something on History Channel. But like the only thing I wish they could have done, like where I think it's interesting where they start the film.
Mhm.
And I know why he did it. He starts it off at, you know, towards like the latter end of the French Revolution, and he's standing there, and
Yeah.
this is purely in the film. He's standing at the beheading of Marie Antoinette. I don't think it's wrong to have started it there, even if that was made for the film.
Yeah.
But I would have liked to have seen, like when I was in the military, and as an officer, I had to take a military history class. You know, when you learn about Napoleon, and I'm glad they emphasized this, like he was an artillery officer.
Mhm.
Like what made him really smart was that he was really able to understand how artillery is used to shape the field, and how that can really change things instead of just typical infantry or cavalry. I would have liked to have seen him develop that, maybe some flashbacks with like another actor playing a young Napoleon, but I would have liked to have seen him going through the French military academy.
Mhm.
I would have liked to have seen him learn about artillery, which for a lot of officers back then, British, French, German, whatever, it's like that's a new thing. That's a
Right.
new phenomenon in terms of like how do you use artillery to like manipulate the battlefield and stuff like that. I would have liked to have seen that. While they show it in the film, and while they even say it explicitly sometimes, I want to see the Corsican boy who's too short, who doesn't get along with anybody, find the one thing he's good at and rub it in everyone's face. And that was the thing where I'm like, I know this, so I can kind of fill the gaps in. But for everyone else, it's like, what's this guy's deal? Why is he so weird?
Yeah, that's probably one of my criticisms is a little more backstory, because you've got to assume that the audience coming in, there's going to be a potential that a lot of them have no idea. They have, you know, they know the name Napoleon, and they know he's French, and that he dominated a large portion of the civilized world, you know, through just sheer force. But how he got there, and you get a little bit of that in the beginning, because you show him come up through the ranks. And you know, speaking of artillery, I love the fact that in this film, in the beginning, whenever the cannons are going off, he plugs up his ears, and by the end, by Waterloo, he just stands there, you know, and it's just giving signals and basically commanding troops. I thought that was kind of an interesting arc, if you will, from kind of inexperience and then learning the ropes and then becoming a true master, and just I think kind of loving the environment that he's in to a large degree, being completely and totally comfortable around all those cannons going off and all those soldiers around him that he has basically at his fingertips.
Yeah, I think, you know, while it's not as obvious for some people, like you kind of see a full character arc, and his whole thing is like, I care too much. Like when he is storming that one that one British fort at the beginning of the film, like he really wants to do it to impress people. Everything he's doing is to impress people. And by the end of the film, it's like he doesn't care anymore.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
the one part where it was really like, I'm like, man, he's ballsy, is when he comes out of exile. And as he's going with like his ragtag team of like Corsican soldiers,
Mm.
his whole Fifth Army is like pointing. Obviously, they're spoilers, people, so
Yeah.
be aware that Brett and I
Yeah.
are going to talk about that. But his own Fifth Army is like pointing guns at him, and then he's like, "Soldiers, do you remember me?
Yeah.
I miss you.
Yeah.
Come back." And I'm just like, man, they will freaking shoot you. You're not paying their bills anymore. And then when they're like, yeah, you know, we actually miss you, it's like, forget how bad things got
Yeah.
during the Russian invasion. It's like, you know what? At least we got to do cool stuff together, man. So by the time that he's in Waterloo, and as you mentioned, he's not even plugging his ears, he's like, you know what? Like, I can die at this point.
Well, he's got rapport. He's got rapport. He's got devotion. I mean, he's got total loyalty from them, which is amazing, given how many of his own troops were killed, basically.
It's like, this is the third that survived based off like pure spite at that point. It's
Right.
like, I would not be saying, hey man, I'm glad to have you back. I'd probably be like, oh no, accidental discharge with my rifle.
But I mean, think about that. What lengths do you have to go to get that kind of devotion and respect and love, essentially? I mean, that's kind of what came across to me was his troops loved him. I mean, and they'd lay down their lives for him. Obviously, many did.
Do you think they intentionally tried to emasculate him more often though? Because I felt like when the battle scenes were there, it's like this is Napoleon on top of the world. But
Mhm.
they don't really do that when it comes to his personal life. It's like when you see him governing as the king, it's very much they're trying to make it look like nobody respects him. Everyone is running around doing their own thing. His wife doesn't even really love him. It's like on the battlefield, he is Napoleon.
Yeah.
At home, he's just like this dude who nobody shows any respect for.
Until he's on top of the world, until he's emperor, I think is when people finally show some respect for him. And it's funny. I do think that Josephine loved him. I just don't think that he realizes that in the film until the very end, when he finds out after she's dead that she kept his letters right by his bedside and would read them over and over and over again. I kind of feel like the Josephine character definitely loved him, but at the same time didn't show him the love that he would have preferred or the love that he showed her. I think she was incapable in a lot of ways of showing the same kind of love and affection the way that he wanted. And I think that's, some people call it, I've heard, the cuck and simp and all this stuff. And I'm just thinking to myself, I don't see that, because for one, I've even heard incel, even though the guy's out there, having affairs with multiple women, while he's away from home. And he certainly didn't like the fact that she slept around. In fact, I love the scene when he comes back from Egypt and he's sitting with some dignitaries at some table, and he's talking about how he's come back and France is a mess, and I've discovered that my wife is a slut. It's just, and I laughed. I laughed
You could hear
out loud
a pin drop in the theater when that happened, and then like a moment later, it's like, dang.
Yeah. I mean, something else. You mentioned Gladiator, and that's definitely something I was thinking about all the influences, because when I watch these films, I see past Ridley, I see past films, and I see influences. I saw a lot of Kubrick in this film, and Ridley's always been really heavily influenced by Kubrick, going all the way back to his first movie, The Duelist. But I think it reflects visually some of his strongest films, like The Duelist, like Gladiator. I think like Kingdom of Heaven director's cut is the one I would recommend.
Hardcore, yeah.
So it had everything. It had that look and feel from the costumes and the sets. They're just absolutely incredible. And I don't think there are many directors at this point who give you such a total and immersive feel when doing period pieces like this. And I think that's fascinating that this guy at 88 years old can still do this. And I don't think he's lost anything. I think he's gotten better at it. I think
it's
audiences
audiences
were masterful.
I mean, I think it's audiences who have changed largely because everyone expects every film now to be like this giant like game changer. And while, definitely I think the quality of films that have been put out by studios like Warner Brothers, like when was the last time Warner Brothers really put out a profitable film? Or Lionsgate or Paramount, Disney being the biggest one. We don't get to even hit that, but it's like no one really allows directors to do what they want. And unless you're like a Nolan or somebody like that, you don't really get a lot of that freedom. I mean, the one thing that I was really proud of is like, I was, to a degree, I was expecting, oh, this is going to be Commodore from Gladiator, but as Napoleon.
Yeah.
And it's like,
and it wasn't at all.
It was a completely different character.
Yeah.
He did that.
Commodus, I could sympathize with in Gladiator. In a way, I understood where he was coming from. It's this child.
You don't agree with it, but you get it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's when you give the villain or the antagonist sympathetic characteristics, I think it makes the story far more complex for the characters in the film and for the audience, because you do feel something for them. But then, you're even more emotionally invested because you're obviously behind Maximus. You're behind the protagonist. You want to see him succeed.
Yeah, and you don't feel that way with Napoleon. Like, as you see
Yeah,
his climb and everything, there's never a point where it's like you're rooting for him.
I
And he
agree.
does, yeah, and he doesn't even really know what he wants. Like, to compare him to a fictional villain that actually had people like defending him online and stuff, like Thanos in Avengers Infinity War. It's like, that's kind of weird. Like, I've never been on the side of a genocidal maniac,
Yeah,
but like, you understand what he's doing. So there are moments in Infinity War amongst his ascension to collect the remaining gems and everything where you're almost like, you know what? Like, he put in the work. Good for him. You don't get that with Napoleon. It's like you're almost like waiting, like, okay, like, is this it now? Are they going to Waterloo now? Like, is this where
yeah,
he's going to fall now?
yeah,
But when he wins, it's like when he gets his victories over, like, the King of Austria and others, it's almost like, like you see it, but you don't want to root. You don't want to respect. It's just
yeah.
not, it's not there. I mean, it's not like a Michael Corleone in The Godfather. Like, he's
Mhm.
very much as you watch him move up, you don't really like him.
Yeah, I didn't get that either. He's not super likable. There are some sequences where I did like him, and it's where the humor comes out.
Mhm.
Like when Vanessa Kirby says something to him about his weight, and he
I
said,
like
and
my meals.
he's like, I enjoy my meals. He's like, destiny has given me this pork chop, and
I
I was
have
just
seen
like,
that meme so many times, especially since Thanksgiving, where everyone is like, "Destiny has brought me this pork chop."
it's a great line.
I think it's great, and I don't mean this as like, a knock at it. Like, I think it's good that Scott was like, he doesn't need to be relatable. He
Mhm,
doesn't need to be likable. He is
mhm.
just what he is.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
feel like audiences are like, oh, especially like, I hate how Disney has tried to make like every villain into some like anti-hero that you're going to sympathize with. I hate that. I
Mhm.
think that's the one thing about our culture, which is we went from like the hero to the anti-hero. Now we're into the glorify the villain stage of things, which
Well, the
I
villain
don't
has
really like.
pain, right? The villain has pain too. I mean, to
Sometimes
be
the
fair,
villain's just evil.
well,
And
to
it's,
be fair, Commodus. I mean that is one character where it was where the complexity did work, but at the same time, like you, I miss bad guys who are just bad. Like the Joker in the Dark Knight.
Mhm.
Some men just want to watch the world burn.
Yeah, and it's like people have tried to say, well, making a film about Napoleon is tantamount to making a film about Hitler.
Well,
And it's like,
But Ridley has compared Napoleon to Hitler, to Stalin. I mean, he said this in interviews. So I don't think that Ridley likes the guy, but I think
I
that
don't think he does either,
but I
but
think
like
he has
there's
respect for him and for what he was able to accomplish. And like the tag in the movie, he came from nothing. He conquered everything. That much is 100% true.
where he tried to compare him to, like, I don't know if I would even say this to Stalin just to be accurate, but like Hitler, it's like, oh, it's this guy who's deeply insecure, who's doing a power move for a power move's sake. If that's the comparison, that's where he kind of went with it in some of the interviews to Napoleon. I get that. Like, I could see that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like, people were like, oh, well, why wasn't he horrible all throughout the film? It's like he's not going to. Like, you're dealing
No.
with a person who sees himself as the hero.
Yeah.
That's the thing. It's
Absolutely.
like we don't see the hero, but in his mind, like, he is the hero. Like the
Mhm.
scene where he and this is my favorite part of the commercials, where you see him take the crown from the Pope
Mhm.
and he reenacts the coronation of Napoleon when he did it himself. It's like, I
Yeah.
see that. It's like that's everything you need to know about the character.
That's probably the most defining moment I think of the character in the movie, and that whole sequence is so beautifully shot. If
That
there's a
that is my favorite scene.
well, there's that painting, the famous painting of Napoleon crowning Josephine, and it's from
Mhm.
the side. It's a side angle, and Ridley used that as visual reference. If you look at the way it's lit and the characters in the backdrop, the coronation, everything. It's just lifted straight from that painting, and that's one of the things I love about Ridley is he's able to capture these beautiful visual moments where nothing needs necessarily be said. It's all said in the visuals.
Speaking of visuals, I will say, like, the battle
The battle
scenes
scenes,
are so hardcore.
they're amazing.
Yeah.
I think they are, like I said, the guy's at the top of his game, and he's had so many great movies to prepare for this. It's almost like old hat, but at the same time, he brought it to another level this time. These battle scenes are sweeping, they are epic, they're completely immersive, you feel like you're really riding along at full speed on horseback into battle with swords drawn, charging towards the enemy. And it's just remarkable what Ridley was able to accomplish with the action. And I think, it's just what we've come to expect from him. He's just a master at it.
Yeah, I know some people who were like, "Oh, it was just too gory. It was too much." And I'm just like, understand, like, if you don't get this, which is as accurate as you're probably gonna get, you get Gods and Generals
Yeah.
with Martin
Yeah.
Sheen, where there's no blood, where there's no bullet wounds, where everyone has all their limbs. I'm like, understand, it's like, we're not that far away from when Hollywood was like, this is acceptable.
Right.
And it's like, let it be
Yeah.
gory, let it be disgusting, because that's what war is.
Yeah.
And I mean, it broke my heart watching that, because like there are scenes where you see him and his army doing doing their standard formations and their flankings and their envelopments. And I'm looking at like the young infantry soldiers.
No,
who are
they're cannon
they're
fodder.
like they're just bullet sponges.
Yeah.
And it's like you see them, and there's like a moment. I mean, I credit the actors to this. Maybe I'm reading into it too much, but they look at each other and then they look ahead and they're just like, I'm gonna die. Like
Yeah.
nothing. Like my job here today is to die.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing is, if you're a horse lover like me, this is a tough movie. I mean, I grew up around horses. I love horses. From the very beginning of the movie, it is brutal on the horses. I mean,
PETA is not endorsing this film.
Yeah. I mean, horses are getting shot. They're getting impaled. They take cannon shots. I mean, they fall through the ice. I mean, it is, in that
the
one
one where
sequence,
he's
it's
fighting
amazing.
the Germans, you see one horse just like blow up. You just see its limbs just go.
Yeah.
And it's just like, what the heck is happening?
But that's what happens when a horse takes a cannon, takes some grape shot. It's pretty gnarly. The interesting part about this is that, yes, we have all of these huge epic battle sequences. However, they're juxtaposed against the personal lives of Napoleon and Josephine and others, which I found to be the way they were portrayed, the way the actors portrayed them were very contemporary and modern. It's almost kind of like an art house film in that he gave the actors a lot of leeway. And I think what we ended up with are performances that are kind of cheeky and frisky and funny, and I think kind of rowdy. We were talking off air about House of Gucci and a lot of the humor that's in that film. And I think a lot of that bled over into the performances here, where he kept it very loose. Nowhere are you going to find in this movie like a stiff and a regal feel that we've seen countless times from past period pieces. Instead, you have this playful quirkiness of the characters blended into this large, epic, mythic imagery. And I think all of that is really interesting. And I also think it's a very risky mix of tones. And you'd think that they wouldn't work together, but I think for this film, I think it works. It works for me, and I think the performances have a more kind of a laid back feel.
It's how do you get somebody to care about the Queen of France having an affair, unless you show her like totally getting it on with some younger soldier or something,
Right?
Or how can you really address that? I mean, that's the thing. Like, I love period films, especially from the Victorian era. I mean, people can judge me. I think the film Young Victoria is a great film, and stuff like that. But it's like you can't get a lot of people to watch it.
Yeah.
And I think Scott gets that. So it's like, how do you walk that fine line of, I want it to be accurate, but I also want people to care and understand. And there's the scene in which,
relate.
Yeah, there's a scene in which she calls him fat at the dinner table. And then he's like, well, why haven't you given me a child? It's not like we haven't done it enough. I mean, I'm not even the only one. And when he says that, he says it without skipping a beat. And you see all the other actors at the table who are just like, their characters are just like, what did he say?
Yeah, that's the thing I'm glad you mentioned. He says that to her in front of like at least a dozen people.
Yeah, like there's no secret. Like, I know you're all talking crap behind my back.
Yeah.
Like, we might as well just have a conversation about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's borderline farce without being insulting, but it's modern enough to get it through to the point where it's not like you're taking people out of it.
Yeah.
I think by letting the actors just do what makes sense. And, as Scott said repeatedly, it's like he had to rewrite it to just kind of allow them to flow and do what makes sense. it's successful, and I don't think many people could have gotten it. And I think Joaquin Phoenix and Vanessa Kirby, usually my complaint in a lot of films in which you have a romantic pairing between the main character and romantic partner, which is most films, like I'm just taken out of it. Like I think some of the worst is to bring Chris Pratt into it again. I don't think Chris Pratt and Dallas Howard have nearly as much chemistry as Chris Pratt and Zoe Saldana or somebody else. Whereas like Joaquin Phoenix and Vanessa Kirby, it's like these two are really good together. Like they were as entertaining in their own separate scenes apart from each other. Like the scene where she's entertaining Tsar Nicholas. I'm just like, man, like she's not saying anything, but she's controlling this scene.
Oh yeah.
Like this is really good.
Now she's it's interesting because in a lot of ways the Tsar thinks he's in control of that whole sequence, and that but it's not. She's in control.
Oh, she knows exactly what she's doing.
yeah it's interesting, and some of that I mean, I sympathized with her from the standpoint of loneliness and having this guy away. I mean, they were obviously infatuated with each other, but she couldn't stand being alone. He couldn't stand being alone either. But his conquest was more important in that sense than tending to things at home. And how often have we seen that? I mean, that's something that happens all the time.
I think this also did a better job of like explaining the importance of like why do kings need sons? I think the film The Other Boleyn Girl, about King Edward having to like divorce his wives and everything, and and like Anne Boleyn has to like screw her brother to try and get a kid out. It's like they very much see as like, oh, this is patriarchal, like they're selfish and all this other stuff. But it's like, and I've always like, this will not score you points at Notre Dame or any other Christian, Catholic school in America. But it's like, I'm a defender of King Edward because I'm like, if he did not have a son, you're plunging your country into another 200-year war of France, because then you don't know who the king is, and it's probably going to be the French cousin. So it's like, I get that. And it's like, you're doing this to avoid thousands of people dying. And they kind of make that claim in Napoleon. I mean, I think they do it in a way that kind of explains it more, but it's like the scene where they're getting divorced. It's like, the thing that I think offended a lot of people is when he smacks her to get through it. And I don't see, this is the controversial part, I don't see that as like a pimp slap, like get it done. It's like, you need to get yourself together, because the only thing that's not getting our heads cut off is me having a son.
Right. Yeah.
And they do a lot. They do that in this film in a way where it's like, even other people I saw talking about online, it's like, they get it. They get it with Napoleon in a way that they don't get it with King Edward and The Other Boleyn Girl. Whereas I would say the emphasis there is way more than it is here as to the consequences. Like there are certain parts of the film where I think people forgot that the French Revolution just happened. Whereas when they're talking about King Edward and all these other films about Anne Boleyn and stuff, they almost completely ignore the fact that they had just lost tens of thousands of people in a very long war of France.
Yeah. I did not. I liked the divorce sequence. I thought that was an interesting scene. The slap to the face was sort of like a cold bucket of water. Yeah. Hey, get with it. We've got to do this. We got it. Let's get it done. Let's get it over. We neither one of us want to be here. It's breaking both our hearts, but France comes first. The good of the many outweigh the needs of the few here. I mean, essentially that's what's going on there. The slap didn't bother me. What I liked was when she was laughing.
That's the
after
sound
he
bite.
Slapped her. No, but he's he slaps her, and then he's like, do this. He's like, get this done for your country, or we're doing this for our country, or something like that. And then she just kind of starts sort of laughing at the absurdity of all of it. And it is absurd. It is absurd. For as much as they loved each other, they wanted to be together, and he picked her when he could have had other women who didn't have children and didn't kind of have the baggage that she had. I think you have to put it in the context of the times as well. Like what you're talking about was that it wasn't too far before this that they were chopping people's heads off, and you had this unbelievable bloodletting going on within the government. It was a completely and total mob rule mentality. And even Napoleon knew that was completely unacceptable. You can't have that kind of anarchy going on.
Yeah, I mean that's the other thing. Like at the beginning of the film, I think I don't know if this is accurate or not, but I think it says the only real part where you're establishing a lot of Josephine's character is in the scenes where she's not really doing a lot of talking. It's when she's running out of the jail cell, having just watched like all her rich friends get their heads cut off and stuff
Right.
like that. It's when she sends her son to go retrieve her dead husband's sword
I love
and
that
stuff like that.
sequence.
Yeah, like that was really like that tells you more about her than anything else. And I think one of the reasons, and I'm just talking like from the cinematic version. I
Mhm.
don't really know much about the historical version, the real Josephine, but it's like let's think about this. You just survived the French Revolution. All your friends and your husband had their heads cut off. And now you're marrying this dude who really has no business being as powerful as he is, except for the fact that he's really ruthless. But you understand that he's also really petty about things. You don't think you're gonna enjoy being queen. You don't think you're gonna end up having affairs and other things. I mean, I think the only things that really unite Josephine and Napoleon in the film is that I don't think, as the viewer,
Mhm.
they think any of this is permanent. It's
Yeah.
almost like they're taking advantage of the moment, and that's why the divorce scene to me is probably the best scene in the film to
Mm.
show you like their dynamic. It's like none of this is out of spite. It's not out of anger or anything. Like they're just like, listen, like all this can go away really fast if we mess it up.
Yeah.
And we know that these people who are our friends now will gladly kill us later.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Those are the stakes. Like you, I found it refreshing to go and see a film about history, or at least history through Ridley's eyes. I found it to be fun and engaging just to see something that is not a franchise or a known IP.
Or of Chris Pratt.
Or yeah, with Chris Pratt. The actors in this movie, the only recognizable ones to me were Joaquin Phoenix and Vanessa Kirby. I didn't recognize anyone else. They're all British actors. Nobody's doing any French accents in this movie, which I think is fun. And I wanted to mention, this film kind of reminded me of another movie that Ridley did, which is not a big action, crazy epic, 1492, Conquest of Paradise, which I think is 1990, 1991. You've got probably
Who's in that?
you've got Gérard Depardieu, who is one of France's greatest actors, who Ridley cast as an Italian. Christopher Columbus, another very complex man, kind of a cipher, but at the same time, a true visionary and a master at navigating the sea and understanding the seas. I mean, we're talking about a time when people thought the world was flat, and he was out there telling everybody, no, it's round. But I love 1492 because, like this movie, he just casts great actors, stars. He's got Sigourney Weaver as the Queen of Spain. He's got Armand Assante in there.
Man, how have I missed this movie?
He's got Vangelis doing the soundtrack. Vangelis worked with Ridley on Blade Runner. It's a good movie. It's a little long. It's a little slow. It's beautifully shot. That's one thing you can always count on with Ridley, is the visuals are going to be a 10. But it's kind of a mixed bag from the standpoint of Columbus, even though I do think that it shines Columbus in a good light, in a heroic light, and in a visionary light. And that's not what we got with Napoleon. So in that sense, it's different. But I saw some of the same kind of risk taking from the standpoint of the casting and just the overall production. It reminded me of that. But it also reminded me a lot of The Duelists, which is a very small film, but also set during the Napoleonic Wars. And it's definitely worth checking out for fans out there.
What I think I had to kind of warn myself not to think about are the only other like cinematic appearances of Napoleon as a character, because the only things I had to draw from are Bill and Ted and
Ziggy Piggy.
Yeah, and the Count of Monte Cristo. And obviously in Bill and Ted, like that is a pure satire.
Right. It's
but
a parody.
in the Count of Monte Cristo, he's almost kind of like Darth Vader-ish.
Yeah.
At the beginning. Like he's not the antagonist, but like when he's there, it's supposed to be like, oh, Napoleon, not a good dude.
Yeah.
And so like for this, it's like you very much see him exposed as the human,
Mm-hmm.
which is why I think Ridley does him dirty at the end when he's on St. Helena
Yeah.
and he's just like he's in his uniform, he's got 5 o'clock shadow, and he's like retelling history of these two girls. When he just kind of like flops over, and it's to show you, like, oh, he's dying. It's just kind of like, it's kind of pathetic, and it's very pathetic
You know,
because it's like he's holding on to this idea of himself, but look where he's at.
well, what's also really interesting about that scene is that he asks the two girls who were playing in front of him about Russia or Moscow being burned down.
St.
Was it St.
Petersburg.
Petersburg being burnt down?
Yeah,
Do you
he
know
was like, "What's the capital of Russia?" And
right?
she's like, "St. Petersburg, Moscow." Before that,
And
he's
who
like, "Who
burned
burned
down
down St.
St.
Petersburg?"
Petersburg? And
And
she's
they're like, "Tsar Nicholas."
or I think she said the people did.
Yeah, like the people did
The
something like
people
that.
did, and he's like, no, I did, and that made me think about that it's not necessarily these guys like Genghis Khan and Hannibal Barca and Napoleon who dictate history. It's those who write it, and I thought that was kind of an interesting message at the end. The keeling over scene, which is an interesting shot. Napoleon has his back to the camera,
That's not how I expected this film to
and
end.
it's just but originally I thought that was a dig, and it might be because we have to remember that Ridley is a Brit. He's also a knight. He is Sir Ridley Scott, so he has been knighted, and this guy is a proud Brit. And it just so happens that this movie really does revolve around the feud between the United Kingdom and Napoleon at that time, and obviously ends with the final battle sequence with Waterloo, where he is soundly defeated. And I kind of felt at first that maybe it was a dig because Ridley's a Brit, and he doesn't necessarily like this guy, and he wants to kick him when he's down. But then I thought, and Lisa brought this up to me, my girlfriend. She said, no, that ending to me was the death of Michael Corleone. He's sitting alone, nobody around him. He doesn't really have much family. He is this sort of lone vessel, and he dies alone by himself, just kind of nods off.
I think that's pretty valid. I mean, another way, and I'm not saying this is the way I saw it, but another way that I've heard people kind of interpret it as like, he's still so powerful that they can't kill him. It's like the scene on the boat where he's talking to all like the young midshipmen and he's eating a nice dinner.
Yeah.
It's almost like, in some way, when I first saw it, I thought, oh, this is just Scott trying to show how honorable the British are, that they're still treating him well. And instead of killing him or taking him back to the French to kill him, they're just going to send him on this island where he'll still like it's not paradise, but like they could have killed him or something.
He'll die of boredom, if anything.
He'll die of boredom. But some people say it's in a way, it's like he's still so powerful that even in defeat they can't destroy him.
Well, and did you see how captivated those British boys were with him when he was sitting there eating dinner and talking about I think he's talking about courage and loyalty and kind of
he's talking about taking the blame for his defeat. He's like, only I messed up. I'm the best in the world at artillery, and I messed up. It's like a humble brag, but it's like, man, you still can't, like, you just don't get it. But like his legend goes around. I will say one thing that I don't think people got, like they got one accusation of wokeness, because you got like he had the one black officer throughout throughout the film at the beginning when he's rising to power, and then you have like the young black midshipman at the end. People were like, oh, they had to do that for DEI. It's like, actually, no, that part's accurate.
It is accurate
because the one guy is French Algerian. So he was an Algerian guy who becomes a soldier in France. Like, that part is accurate. And the British Navy did take on black and Moroccan sailors young at certain points as they were expanding. So like those parts where people were like, oh, it's the DEI. I'm like, actually, no, that part's accurate.
Yeah, I don't think there's a woke bone in Ridley's body, frankly. And I think
this was the least woke movie I have seen in theaters in a long time.
I think that might be one of its greatest accomplishments, frankly, and why it's standing out, because I never got an ounce of any of that kind of stuff. that Ridley's not of that generation, and he is certainly not going to be dictated to by anybody. What he should write or how he should write it. I mean, he had critics coming up to him for Napoleon and talking about how the historical accuracies, and he just told them to F off. I mean, literally, he's just F off, sir. And the guy's like, yeah, but what about? He's like, F off, sir. And I'm sitting here thinking to myself, that's refreshing. Even Adam Driver recently was accosted by an interviewer.
He was like, don't you think that crash scenes are like stupid? And
cheesy,
then he says that.
He says cheesy to him.
Mads Mikkelsen got that too. He did a movie about like the King of the Danes or something, and someone tried saying, "Well, there's a lack of people." So Mads Mikkelsen's looking, he's about to yell at the guy, and then the director's like, "This is a movie about the Danes in the 14th century."
Right. Mads was just laughing his ass off, which I thought was a great response. You just mock them. You just laugh at them. I don't even know what he's talking about. That's basically what Mads said. But Adam told the guy to F off. He's like, F you, man. I don't even know you. I don't know what you're talking about.
There's one single line of dialogue in the movie that I do have an issue with. It's when he comes back and he's like, chastising Josephine for being a slut and stuff. And when they're on the couch and he's like, I feel so bad for you. You're nothing without me. He says a scene where he's like, I'm not built like other men. I don't succumb to such pettiness. And I'm like, is this from like Red Pill YouTube or something?
Yeah, I mean, that's
the one part that kind of took me out. I'm like, I don't think that was, I think that was put in for something.
No, honestly, we get back to talking about how they rewrote this script for Joaquin. I think that's part of where some of this, you see some of that influence come in. I really do.
That's the one part where I actually started laughing. I'm like, okay, that's kind of dumb.
But again, I mean, those are big risks, man. And I just think that, from the battlefield to the very small personal moments, Ridley is not afraid to take big risks. And I think that's what we want in artists and in directors and in filmmakers more. We want more risk taking, less formula, less packaging. I want my expectations to be blown away. I don't want to see things coming. I mean, these are the things. These are elements of why we go to the cinema, why we love movies. They take us by surprise, and they take us in directions that we don't often anticipate or think are going to happen. And that's part of movie magic and fun storytelling.
And that's what I do love about him as a director, because even though like Blade Runner got a sequel and he didn't direct it, it's like all of his stuff. It's all very much like, this is the story. This is the film. Like, you're not going to get the one movie I think he should have done a sequel to, but I'm kind of glad they didn't, is Body of Lies. I thought he was setting up Leo to be like a James Bond-esque figure. But, I saw that movie when I was like 16. When I saw it 2 years ago, I'm like, oh yeah, no, he's saying that this guy's done. He's beaten. He's disenfranchised. He's done. He wants to live his life in Jordan. It's over for the character. And I think that's the thing that he's really good at. Like, he's really good at showing people rising, but also people's stories end. And I think there's this animus in Hollywood. And this is why I just watched the Sly documentary on Netflix.
Oh, I got to see that. Yeah.
Oh, it's really good. Like, Sylvester Stallone says something that I actually don't agree with. He's like, you should never kill your main character. Sylvester Stallone is known for completely changing the course of Rambo.
Absolutely.
And everything else. And I think the one movie that I really like that did not get him a lot of praise is Fist. It's where he's the union leader.
Right.
And they kill him at the end. I think that makes sense for the story. He argued with it, and he publicly argued with the writers and the critics, because he openly said, I didn't want him to die. And it's like, sometimes you need the character. Sometimes the character needs to die.
Yeah.
And like, there's this issue. And I think, and that's just an example, a recent example of something I saw, but it's like, Scott is perfectly good with writing about finality, whether it's a real character or whether it's somebody based off a real person or whether it's a fictional character.
Maximus could have easily lived at the end of Gladiator.
Yeah.
But they made a hard choice, and he took a risk, and he's, sent him off to the heavens and his wife and child. It's similar to The Northman, which I really liked a lot.
That is one of the best films I have seen in a long time.
Big risks.
I could have seen a Conan-like franchise of that.
Absolutely, absolutely, me too. Because there's so many overtones of Conan in that movie, and so many very obvious influences. But I thought that he could have survived and then found his bride to be and child and lived happily ever after. But they made a hard choice. They took a risk, and I respect artists and directors and creators who take those kind of big risks and just say, "No, this is it," and and as a viewer, in the audience, you've got to reconcile that somehow, and some of these films, where those kind of risks are taken, they're some of my favorite films, even though the character doesn't survive. I love Gladiator. I mean, that's a 10, man. I mean,
Yeah.
it's interesting to think about what that movie would have been like had Oliver Reed survived filming and not drinking himself to death, but they were able to turn it around and make it something really special. So, and I think you said something interesting in the beginning. We're talking about how these movies age over time. I think Napoleon over time is going to be something that we come back to, and maybe Ridley's so famous for being ahead of the times. That's what they said about Blade Runner. They said that about a lot of his films, and he's always said that being ahead of the times is just as bad as being behind the times. But I don't think so. I think it's actually gives the opportunity for people to catch up and to rediscover some of these films and for them to have a second life.
I think, I think movies like Inception have aged better over time. I
Yeah.
think, say Inception, Memento, even The Dark Knight. I still like The Dark Knight has had some revisionism in terms of how successful it was. It was successful among the audiences. Critics didn't really know what to do with it until about a year later, and now suddenly it's like, oh, it was everyone always loved it. It's like, I remember when people didn't like that.
It was mixed.
People didn't really like Batman Begins either.
Mhm.
And then the Dark Knight Rises comes out, and then suddenly everyone's like, oh, it didn't live up to the expectations of the last two films. It's like, actually, I would say it still exceeded that. The last two films' expectations were really low. People were not
Mhm.
excited when Jared Leto got cast. So I mean, I think I think the same goes for like Zack Snyder, and I don't know if it was Ridley Scott or somebody else, but they were like, if Watchmen had come out in 2016 versus 2008, that would have been considered one of the best film adaptions ever of
Yeah.
comic book
I
material.
think Chris Nolan said that had it come out when comic book movies were more mainstream, and
Yeah.
you had this, and so people were familiar with the genre, to get this sort of deconstructionism of superheroes, which is ultimately what Watchmen is. It probably would have been more successful. And as a note on Watchmen, I think that the director's cut is the essential cut for Watchmen. It's
Yes.
fantastic.
I mean, same
I
goes
almost
for the
think it's
Ultimate Edition of Batman versus Superman: Dawn of Justice,
yeah,
or Zack Snyder's Justice League. I mean, with Napoleon, you and I were talking about beforehand, like, I could see an extra half hour, 45 minutes of this movie.
absolutely.
I think there were some areas that were cut out for time
Yeah.
where it's like, I would have liked to have seen a little bit more of certain parts.
Yeah, I like the pacing. It did not feel like a 3-hour movie. And because of that, I think that a director's cut, which is rumored to be 4 hours long and is going to come to Apple TV at some point in time, I'd like to see that. I'd like to see what was cut out and how it applies, and if it makes for a better film. And on top of that, I just like to see some more visuals. I just like to see more of that world, because so much of what really does is provide sort of this keyhole in time, where you can go back and see these things as they actually were, or at least the best representation that we can do today as to what they could potentially have been like. And not many directors are able to do that these days, not with the authenticity that he brings to the screen. So, for a man who's 88, the fact that he's still taking big, big risks and knocking out epics like this, I think shows Ridley is not only a true visionary artist, but one of the great auteur directors of all time. And I think it's why his work is still so important, and why we're talking about it,
I don't think any other director could have really done this film justice like him.
I don't think so either. And Stanley Kubrick was talking about doing a Napoleon film with Jack Nicholson back in the day, but it never materialized. So we've got this, and we've got Waterloo, which from 1970, which is Rod Steiger as Napoleon. I'm kind of interested to see that, but at the same time, I think I kind of know what I'm going to get with it.
Well, I mean, it's like Zack Snyder's 300 and then 300 Spartans. It's like, yeah, it's the same story.
Yeah.
But they're two different movies. much like, Snyder's Justice League and Joss Whedon's Justice League. I mean, if I don't go back and watch anything else of Napoleon, I could probably say this is the definitive Napoleon film.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I don't want to see, like, usually when, like whether I'm talking comic books or I'm talking movies, it's like I can always be like, I wonder what this director's version of it would have been, or this
Right.
artist or
Sure.
writer's version of it would have been. I don't want to see anyone else do Ridley's Napoleon.
Me
I
neither.
don't want to.
Yeah, no, me neither. So it's not a perfect film, but I think it lives up to a must-see status, and I encourage everyone to check it out on the big screen. Sadly, we're out of time. Remso, give everyone your social media coordinates so they know how and where to follow you.
Just go ahead and find me at Hey Remso on X. That's HEYREMSO. And for everything and more, Bounding Comics on X. That's boundingintocomics.com for all the news, commentary, analysis, and more.
Make sure and like and subscribe to Bounding Into Comics for more videos like this one on YouTube and Rumble. Also, let us know in the comments section your thoughts on this video and Napoleon if you've seen it. Thanks for hanging out with us, and we'll see you next time.